For this microphone, if you need to use the microphone, all you do is there's a button on the side here and press it, and it'll go green and you can speak away.
Right now.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. I'm on over there. Can you hear me all right?
Somebody needs to know that maybe it's, so they, whatever they put out there, people hear.
Okay, is that part of your staff?
Yeah, that's my voice.
Okay, so they're streaming. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
All right, I think we've assembled one crowd we've got. What we have is a tremendous crowd of experts here. And I have a couple people seated in the audience as subject matter experts or call a friend anytime we have a real conversation. Thank you for, can you all hear me here in the back? All right?
Yes, sir.
Good, thanks. This is a first for us. American Veterans Vote is very glad we could share the opportunity to do this forum with the Hampton Roads Black Caucus. And importantly, get after some questions that we were asked by several people who have run through various races and knocked on many doors and heard continuously about workforce availability and housing. And it really is up here an interesting mix between what we're talking about here. It's affordable, yes, available, good, but importantly, it's for the workforce that is trying to find a place to live with a family, typically, and maybe nearby childcare in a community that's a vibrant community that's growing, that's constantly changing. Some would say, if you look at the statistics that Rumpla, did I say that right?
Yes.
Puts out a frankly affluent community in many areas, in many respects. But on the other hand, it's a working class, blue collar, tremendous shipbuilding, tremendous industries that are growing. And so it's really an interesting mix of housing requirements. And so it was a question that was asked. So we said, we'll be glad to do that. American Veterans Vote is glad to do that. American Veterans Vote is a new organization, about 3 years old. Our name says it all because it's a fact. American veterans do vote. And we say, as a matter of fact, it's a reminder sometimes that it is a voting bloc in Virginia, over 700,000 veterans in Virginia. About 400,000 of them vote. So our job is clearly that 300,000 to get them out and vote. We believe in change through the ballot box. We act in accordance with the code of conduct. Be a member of our organization, you sign the code of conduct. Any mom or dad will look at it and say, yeah, that makes pretty good sense. And we do that because we want to be recognized as speaking as veterans, not for veterans, not another VFW and not another American Legion, but someone to put together frankly, the political muscle of veterans who have a point of view. And life experiences, not all the same, but frankly, likely from the same place, with their hand in the air, serving and supporting the veterans. All then on the divergent path, community members, leaders, you name it, in our communities. So it's a good thing. It's a great community. It's a lot of fun to work with this about 500 now members that we have American Veterans Vote in Virginia. So when the question came, what could you do to help identify and highlight key aspects of the housing issue in Virginia Beach, we jumped right on it. We're going to do another one in Fredericksburg here later on. And what we want to do is do that with a group of experts. We don't propose to be experts. We've assembled we'd like to have some experts on the subject here in Virginia Beach. It's a mix of government and private industry and private organizations that we have up here. And what I'd like to do is first welcome you for coming to our very first, likely with this small, intimate, wonderful facility in Virginia Beach Library here, but a crowd that can have key questions asked of the members of the panel after they've gone through a presentation. To do that, we'd like to make some introductions of the panel. And to do that, I'd like to get moving on the agenda. Here's how it's going to run. This is our agenda. Welcome to introductions. We'll get to that in a moment. We'll set a discussion framework which says, what's the nature of the problem? This is really a work in progress. It's meant to stir debate and discussion and questions. We'll go through the discussion framework. Michael Scholler here, who's the head of our 501c4, will do that, kind of describe what we believe the problem likely is. But the resident experts are here, including you in the audience, who can better define it. We'll do panel presentations, which is an opportunity for each of the panel members to kind of give a perspective on the housing question that they see. frankly, work with daily, and have that perspective as we then get to Q&A from the audience about aspects of the housing issue that you're interested in. We have a mix in the audience. Like I said, we have some subject matter experts out here. We have members of the Hampton Roads Black Caucus, and we have elected officials in the audience. I know I see Kevin. Any other elected officials? Or yeah, give him a hand. Let's hear it for Kevin. Just oh, that's true. I jumped to that. We also have representation of Congresswoman Debbie Kagan. She's in the audience. Any other candidates or elected officials?
I'm Zach Sykes, and we're here from Delegate Greenhall's office.
All right, Delegate Greenhall's office. Thank you very much. And yes?
Rob Thompson, I'm running the House of Buildings, the 84th District, so
Welcome. And you're a veteran of Navy.
I am.
So, we'd like to say in American Veterans Zone, we're trying to encourage veterans to vote, volunteer, or run. So you check one of those blocks, you're good to go. And
96 against Kelly Fowler, so people can have a choice.
you're running.
My buddy is getting all the paper together on out to their family, so I'm supporting.
Thank you. All right. Well, that's what it's about. Like we said, yes, ma'am.
Myra Payne for District 19,
Good.
Virginia Beach and Chesapeake.
Terrific.
Army
So,
Nurse Corps.
pardon me?
Army Nurse Corps.
So is my sister-in-law. God bless you. Yes.
Bob Chandler, founding member of American Veterans Vote. I'm running for the Board of Supervisors in Surrey County, and I also served for 4 years on the Economic Development Party for Surrey County.
Good. You are another lifeline. I'll call you when I need some economic development. Okay. All right. So we have a great audience. We have a wonderful panel. I'll let them make a brief introduction. We want to start on some introductions. They'll start on introducing the framework when he gets, and I call on you to your presentation to add a little bit of color to the name we've got. We have two more people that are likely to come, two members from the city council who are likely to come, and we'll incorporate them when they show up and welcome them. Welcome to you again. What I'd like to do now is open up with the panel members and subject matter experts, as mentioned. Rick Dwyer is here, gentleman dressed in suit, fashionably so. Thanks for being here with us today. He has a very important position in the Hampton Roads Military and Federal Facilities Alliance. I worked with them when I was Deputy Commander, Joint Forces Command, all those years ago. And they were a very important community partner, and I got to know them very well. So they really linked us to a community that was important to the Joint Forces Command. We have Ashley Scott with us. I know she's with us. Thank you very much for being here. Ashley, Policy and Innovation Coordinator, Blue Star Families. That may be not quite enough, so I'll allow you to add to that. Thank you for being here. Very active and interested in veteran issues. We've got Sharon Schuff, Housing and Neighborhood Preservation, City of Virginia Beach. Thank you for being with us. And we have Ron Taylor, President Hampton Roads Black Caucus. And I don't think, thank you for joining us, Ron. Thanks for partnering with us. We don't yet have Rosemary Wilson with us, Vice Mayor. We expect she'll likely show up. They are always very busy, so we're thankful they accepted the invitation. We have a chair waiting right here.
And I am actually only here for half of it. I'm Karen Porcillo, the Housing Development Administrator for the Department of Housing. And Sharon is going to be my stand-in. She's going to do a tag team, so I'll be leaving halfway through. But we were here and asked, I don't know, can everyone hear me?
No.
Yeah.
You got the
Yes.
Yeah.
We were here and asked to be, based on the fact that we assisted with Chris Taylor's Housing Summit that took place just a week ago.
Okay, so we're going to go probably from Ron to you so that you can make an exit. Okay. So that said, what I'd like to do now, though, is ask Michael Schober again, who works with our C4, who's really done a lot of young work putting together a program, as has Bruce Johnson over here. Bruce, every one of you have talked to him because he has recruited all of you. And Bruce is our representative. He's our chief of our Southeast Virginia regional team for American Veterans Vote. Has done a great job putting that together. So, Michael, over to you. Shown here is the impact of the military community in Hampton Roads. I was astounded when I saw these numbers. 40% of the GDP of the Hampton Roads area comes from federal military spending. When I saw the number of active duty and dependents and veterans here, I thought it was a misprint. This all comes down to one thing though. How do we care for the families? Everything turns on the families. You know, the military, 26 years in the Marine Corps, a whole bunch of time in the CIA overseas. And for all of us, the one thing that gave us the ability to go out into, frankly, scanty parts of the world and do stuff in defense of the United States was because we knew our families were being taken care of. And the military presence here is no different. We ask a lot of our military families. We ask a lot of civilian workforce that supports the military. And if we can take care of the families, it all works. If we don't take care of the families, it undercuts everything. So I won't try to read this to you. I'll ask you to read it because you can read a lot faster than I can speak. But this gives you an idea of what's unique about the problem we're here to discuss tonight.
I hope we refine that problem, add issues that we need to address.
Good question. Are these going to be available somewhere where we could look at them other than right here?
I can send it to you.
That'd be good.
Number 3 is a little aspirational, but the budget didn't get cut, veterans got kept, and we continue to see the growth of the military mission set, particularly for the Navy, and let's hear it for shipbuilding like that. And so I think anything that points downward in prospects for Hampton Roads regarding government workforce and the military, I think is probably off base. That's an assertion, but number 4 was a hard one to put together because of, there are 9 communities here in Hampton Roads. All of them have elected leadership, all of them have policies, all of them have requirements and needs. So again, back to Rumpf, thank you for knitting that together, at least in terms economically. But importantly, for all of the claimants for housing, all of the houses that need to be for workforce, everyone has not only government, but have firefighters and teachers and those who need housing. So it really must be quite a challenge, and we're looking forward to hearing a little bit about that challenge.
Yeah, the 2 points that I'd like you to take away from this slide. One is that the housing issue for military families is not the same as housing for the homeless, for the unemployed. It is a completely different problem set. And because it's a different problem set, it calls for different answers. The second is as Bob and Eric both mentioned, I'm a structures guy. I look at how organizations are structured to tell me how well they can accomplish a mission. And when you look at the diffusion of responsibilities and authorities that affect the housing issue, as you say, 17 local governments, the federal government deals with money. If you're worried about their ability to pay the basic laws for housing, that's going to be done at the federal level. And if we're talking about a zoning issue, that's going to be done at the county level. Are the federal and the county talking to each other? That's an issue that we may need to short circuit, and we may need to create a forum to bring that up. But that's one of the issues that we want to examine tonight. Somebody asked Einstein one time, if you had an hour to save the world, what would you do? How would you use it? And he said, I'd spend the first 58 minutes defining the problem. Well, we spent a little bit more than 58 minutes on this, but this is how we are defining the problem. And this is what I would ask that the panel members talk to tonight.
just to make sure that you don't have to turn around. You don't have to speak with your back to the microphone. That is the problem statement that we've turned off. So, without further ado, let me turn it over to the experts and let the people know what they're talking about. Take charge.
I'd like to let Ron start.
Yes. Workforce, housing and shortage and impact both mission and readiness of the military active and economic growth of the commercial. That is a problem because it is a problem. Workforce, housing, affordable housing is a problem. Some developers are developing large homes, you know, when I say home, apartments, condos, or whatever. But when the city negotiate that with them, from what I'm hearing and what I'm gleaning, is that the developer said, I'll make 10% affordable. Everything else would be at market rate. Well, at market rate, some of our military can't survive on market rate, cannot meet that market rate expectation of paying. So we have to do something. I remember being stationed in New York and being stationed in Charleston, South Carolina, where my VHA was only $50 a month. When I relocated to New York, it went up to nearly $600-700 a month because they adjusted for the geographical area that I was in. And I think that's the same thing the military is going to have to do. Then you have a lot of pushback from developers and fashions that are blocking affordable housing. Because when we have to make sure we define what affordable housing and workforce housing is. Some individuals think they're like Section 8 or you know, stuff of that nature. And so when you're going into a community and say, we're going to put up affordable housing, they're in the mindset, you bring in a project here with low income people, you know, going to trash our neighborhood. So we have to get that cleaned up first. So it'll be received well. And it will impact the mission because if someone, E5, is out serving our country, defending our freedom, and their families are not being taken care of back here, and their wife is communicating with them, they can't afford this and that. Instead of him focusing on him or her focusing on the mission, they're focusing on the well-being of their family, because family comes first. And we have to address this issue. And I had to get on, our board had to get on the city of Norfolk because someone said, hey, I've got about 80 units I'm gonna build, all affordable to meet military need and be conducive to military and you know, like our first responder. Well, they pushed back on it and they took it off the table and went around and around. And so what ended up happening was the Hampton Roads Black Caucus got involved and asked the city to put it back on the table, and they did. And the project is moving forward. It's down on 35th Street. And so, but you have different people that are pushing back because they thinking you're bringing in projects or low income homes that's going to bring the value of their property down. And we must straighten up that myth first. Because if you go in there and say, oh, I'm gonna bring affordable housing, first thing they call, oh, you're bringing in low income. So we have to make sure we clear that up first, because people can receive it better, because you have to meet people where they are and meet them so they can understand what workforce housing is, what affordable housing is. And the state and federal have to work together with our municipalities in order to address this issue. And at our local level, we need to work with our government, our federal government, and seeing how we can work together to get this, and along with our state, because our state have grants and loans that people can get, and I think it's VHDA, in order to help, help get the money to build affordable homes or workforce homes. And it is a shortage, because another thing that the government is looking at is how do we address those that are coming from prison and reintegrate back into our community. So we have to address that need too.
Okay, good, thank you. Rick, go ahead.
Sure. Evening, everybody. I want to thank you, Bob, again for having me here this evening. As you said, I'm the executive director of the Hampton Roads Military and Federal Facilities Alliance, better known as HRMFA, just because it's much easier to say. But we are a regional Hampton Roads organization that exists to support and advocate for the military and federal presence all throughout Hampton Roads. So we work with all of the federal installation leaders here throughout Hampton Roads to support them in being successful in their missions. And one of the things we frequently hear when we interact, especially with the military installation leaders, is their concern about, in the last few years, the lack of affordable housing, primarily for their junior, mid-level enlisted folks with families. I know I served over 20 years in the Air Force. And one of the first things, whenever I got orders to go someplace new, my wife was looking into where are the good schools, all those kinds of things. It's no different today. I mean, so our service members want to live where there's, good schools first. Hopefully they can find affordable housing. And another important consideration is childcare. Somewhere near where they live, or somewhere on the path where they can, from where they live to their installations. And so what we're hearing is the lack of affordable housing is forcing service members to have to find someplace farther and farther away from where they are stationed. And that puts a burden that increases commuting costs. That puts, again, depending on where they can find childcare, what the spouse situation is, it puts a burden on the family. And as we talks about here in terms of affecting military readiness, all the services right now are having a recruiting problem. And part of family quality of life is part of that. Because if service members, one, can't afford, to live someplace where their families are safe, where they can send their kids to good schools, where their spouse can have a good career, they're going to vote with their feet, and they're going to go find someplace where they can work and do those kinds of things. So I think those are contributing factors to the recruiting shortfalls that we see. As we talk and hear from leaders and talk with the municipalities and our congressional delegation, there's not a lot of easy levers. There's no easy button to push that says produce more, affordable workforce housing. A lot of it is market based. We have on here how can the federal entities help? We saw in the last couple of years as prices really shot through the roof due to the pandemic, the military housing allowance system couldn't keep up with those increases, which again was putting a big burden on the service members. We did see that it took many months, but they came out about halfway through the year and increased the housing allowances in certain areas. The peninsula got about a 15% increase. I think the south side only got about a 5% increase. But we were one of I think it was 20 or 30 areas across the country that they did see an increase midway through the year because of the way the prices had shot up. But that's a double-edged sword, right? Because especially when you're in a large military area like this, as soon as the military raises the housing allowance, the landlords will raise the cost of rent. And that's one thing DOD tries to not be the ones who are setting the market, because then you're constantly chasing your tail. So it's not an easy solution. It is going to take the federal government, it's going to take the local jurisdictions in terms of the permitting. What types of housing developments are they permitting? Where are those developments? Working together to figure out what's the right mix of housing for, again, not only the military, but in general workforce, like I said, first responders and those kind of things. We were just at a meeting this morning out at Coast Guard Base Portsmouth, and the base commander there brought it up again that, hey, he's still hearing this from his service members. But he mentioned, and we got to get some more information on this, but he mentioned a project down in Northeast North Carolina where they are building a complex, and it is essentially set aside for first responders, which he is hopeful that his Coast Guardsmen down there in Elizabeth City and even folks here will be eligible to live in that, along with other first responders, fire, police, EMS types of folks down there. So it's something we want to maybe look into and see what it is the officials down there in North Carolina did. Is that something we can maybe replicate up here in Hampton Roads? So at the end of the day, like I said, it is going to take all these entities, federal, state, and local, I think, to get after this. Again, there's no easy button to push, but it is something we need to try and figure out because one of the things that makes Hampton Roads so attractive for having such a large military presence is its relatively modest cost of living. And if we start, where it gets to be as expensive as living in Northern Virginia or California and stuff like that, well, when it comes to new mission bed downs, we can put ourselves at risk or write ourselves out of those types of competitions. So.
Let's pass that to Karen.
So I'd like to first say ditto to everything that's been said, but I want to put another perspective on this as well. It's affordability, it's availability, but it's also safety and security and sanitary places for people to live. Coming from a different viewpoint, I'm a retired military spouse. So my husband was a JO when we first moved here. We had different tours, but when we first moved here, affordability was one of our biggest issues. And he knew he was going to be leaving and deploying. So we wanted a safe place to live. And it was not easy at that point, back when, I don't want to tell you the year, but way back when, we found a place and it was a sense of community. It wasn't with the military, but I tell you, it was very supportive. So that's the kind of home you also want to look when you're with the military, to find that sense of community within that development, whether it's townhome, multifamily, or single family.
Okay.
Coming back, we left this area and then came back again for a second tour here. And of course, we upgraded a little. So affordability was another issue. So affordability impacts everyone. It impacts those that are at the very lower income, the middle income, and then as you start to increase your incomes, you're going to start looking at the affordability. And that affordability also impacts, because you may be able to afford at this higher level, but you're shrewd and you're not going to always go up for the highest level, and you may be looking at a more modest income, modest income home. And that leaves that person that could have only afforded that modest income home to only now be able to look at something less or more than what they could really afford. So what we're doing could impact others. We need to think about that. With the housing department, Sharon and I work together for housing development. The housing department looks at a wide variety of different divisions. Rental housing is one, which you're probably more familiar with, is Section 8. We do a lot of that.
You got it.
Can you still hear me? Good. We do the rental housing. We also do code enforcement, because once you're in your home, you also want to make sure that it's not deteriorated by neglect. You want to make sure that it's up to standards. So don't forget that preservation is a very important part of this piece as well. And our code enforcement people will help with that. In addition to having that, we look at our homeless services population. So we have a homeless services division, and there may be those people that are on the brink of homelessness. They may be out on the street, out on the street, homeless, or literally homeless, that they are on the verge of either couch surfing. They could be a friend that's been sleeping in one of your places, couch surfing. So we need to think about all the aspects of our military and where they may be in that particular moment of their life, and not just looking at something that's for rental. Our last division within the housing department is housing development, one of my favorite divisions. And Sharon is our finance coordinator for that. Sharon oversees our housing opportunity funds. And our housing opportunity funds are the local funds here within the city. They're federally funded that we've received from the federal government that we actually put in an application submittal for. And Sharon can go into a little bit of detail for that. But those are funds that help create additional affordable housing, whether it's mixed use, large multifamily developments, mixed use developments, or we could be looking at some smaller units. for special needs populations, whether it's for the veterans. We do have veterans housing in Virginia Beach, Cedar Road. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but it's a great program and a great product that turned out. And Chesapeake has one similar based on the fact that Virginia Beach and Sharon actually used to be with Virginia Beach Community Development Corp and assisted in all of that work, so she can share with that. We do have a passion for the veterans, me and most of our teammates that are there. We have some information packets. I hope you take advantage of those and review them, because on just even this one, what we call the Pocket Pal, which is for homeless. But if you look at the back of it, it has veteran services and it provides information on you. So I highly recommend you take this and share it. We always share out what's going on with food pantries and resources by a monthly update. This one happens to be May, but this will give you information. Please share it. Tell us about the churches in the areas or a lot of our religious affiliations. The local government here, and especially housing department, we work within the community. So we work with our faith-based organizations, our nonprofits and our for-profits. We work with the state and the local governments to provide assistance through this. And you should be able to contact us or go on our website, because we post a lot of this information as well. And then lastly, I recommend that you take out one of these handouts which shows some of the affordable housing that is available currently and how we have that affordable housing by type. So that may be something that you could look at as well. I'm just going to see if there's any questions. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, I have to be leaving shortly for another meeting at 6:30. And Sharon will be taking over, but if anyone has any questions about that, I'll be happy to answer.
Let me ask you one before you depart. Thank you, Karen, very much. I know Sharon will be taking over. How do veterans qualify in the sense of for affordable housing?
For affordable housing, well, veterans depend on what their position are. Will they meet eligibility? Those are some of the questions.
Have you looked at the income levels of, E3?
No, we have not, because we do housing development ourselves. So the rental housing group actually works within that time period.
Okay.
And we do have veterans that are going through some Section 8 rental housing
Is that right?
applications. Yes, Cedar Road actually has some of that.
Okay. Well, let me let Ashley speak next. Sharon, I know you'll stay behind.
Sorry, I have to
We'll
run.
give you range to run. And go ahead, Ashley, please.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Ashley Scott. I'm a Policy and Innovation Coordinator with Blue Star Families, which is the nation's largest and fastest growing nonprofit that serves military and veteran families. So that's everyone who's connected to the military, everyone who's connected to veterans, including caregivers and survivors. Part of what we do, I'm just going to give you a brief rundown so you understand the role that Blue Star Families can play, not just on this panel, but in the community. So the way that we serve military families is twofold. The first is direct programming. We are a community building organization, so I'm very excited to sit on this panel today and hear about all of the wonderful efforts of the people around me, and the idea of the community being such an important part of your experience where you live, and making sure that you have those strong bonds, whether that is when you're living on base with the other military families, or with the civilian neighbors who you're living with off base. And so we have 13 chapters across the country. I am pushing quite aggressively for the 14th to be here in Hampton Roads, because I think that this community really benefits from that work, and Blue Star Families would learn a lot here as well. The second prong of what we do is our research. So we are known for our military family lifestyle survey, which was first launched in 2009. It is the oldest and most comprehensive survey of its type. And I think he's pulling up the link to take it. It is currently open. Our 2023 military family lifestyle survey is open, and I would encourage everyone in this room who's military and veteran connected to please take it. We use this research to go out and do panels like this, to advocate and to teach communities, regulators, politicians, anyone who has the ability to improve the experiences of military families. We bring that data to them. And so you'll see I have lots of papers in front of me. This is a lot of our research, and so I'll touch on this to give some context. But yeah, that's sort of Blue Star Family's background. And I welcome any questions and also have cards here for when we're done. But just some background on housing. So in the 2022 Military Family Lifestyle Survey, BAH/off-base housing was a top 5 military issue for the first time. Now again, the MFLS was started in 2009, so we know that there was a big impact from a lot of the economic upheaval of the past few years. It really impacted military families' finances and made housing a little bit more difficult to come into contact with. And so additionally, let me go back a little bit. That data was collected this time last year, so over the summer. In the fall, we had a smaller survey, a pulse check on housing and relocation. And that I think was really important because it touched on a lot of what my fellow panelists have talked about, which are those key aspects that military families look at when they're concerned about, or when they're looking after they PCS or looking for a new community. So those are things like school and safety and childcare. But interestingly, something that came out in our pulse check was also the availability of housing that accepted pets, which was a little bit unexpected for me until I learned that military families are more likely to own pets than civilian families, and we tied us back to the fact that having a pet is a protective factor, right? It's another part of your community that helps you feel more connected. It can help your kids deal with a deployment or a TDY or something like that. But the other thing that stood out to us in that was that the average cost that a military family was paying over the basic allowance for housing was about $360 each month. And in our other surveys, we'll ask, did you pay over $200, but not ask for a specific amount? So it was really exciting to get that number, to be able to take that not just to DOD, but also to Congress. And so I'll just briefly touch on some of our congressional advocacy, which I think speaks to this question. Actually, before I do that, I did want to say I would encourage this question to be changed and to remove the word help. I think that framing the problem, how can federal, state, and local government actions promote equitable allocation and responsive remedies, really speaks to the power that our federal, state, and local government has and their responsibility to do this work. And so just to briefly touch on our congressional advocacy, Blue Star Families is currently working with a coalition of other military and veteran service organizations to push for BAH restoration, to restore BAH payments to 100% of their calculated rate, to ensure that military families are receiving all of the money that they need to live in whatever house they want to. Additionally, we were really excited 2 years ago, we got in language that required DOD to study whether or not the BAH calculation rate, or excuse me, the calculation method aligned with what military families were looking for when they moved to a new community. So that included safety, that included schools. And so that report will be coming out later this year. And we think that it will be really important in the military family quality of life panel that will be getting started in Congress to really help them come up with some solutions at the federal level. And then the last thing that I will say, and I promise I will stop so people can ask questions, is that in each of our reports, and I'm really excited to share this because it is my job to write recommendations. In each of our reports, we publish policy recommendations for the government at all levels, federal, state, and local, as well as for nonprofit organizations, and additionally for specific entities within the government. So we'll have specific recommendations for DOD, for the VA, but we also know how important it is that communities are involved. So we have community recommendations as well. I would encourage you to go to our website, which you can access at bluestarfam.org. You can also grab one of my cards at the end, it has it on there, to explore all of our research and really engage with that we have on there. So thank you for your time and for listening. I saw a lot of you getting the QR codes. I really appreciate you taking the survey as well. Thank you.
We get it from out there. Good. All right. Ashley, thank you very much. We just got word that unfortunately Rosemary Wilson will not be able to make it, but we will send along our questions to her, questions you may have that would be of interest to her. What I'd like to do is take the opportunity of the forum here and ask maybe one or two questions quickly. You look like you have another message. Rosemary, you Bruce. Oh, you can put the other set up there. This is terrible. Eyes get old and you look at a black background. Come up here and change it to black. So I can at least see the slides. Put the slides back up. What I want to say, what I point out is, I've got 3 questions I'd like to ask to get the questions rolling. I've got a set of cards that we'd like to run up to you if you'd like to ask some questions or raise your hand, and if we can hear in here, we can just do it from your seats. You don't have to make it difficult. Okay? I can just get the slides.
I'm lost.
You're lost. You don't need to worry about that, these slides.
Okay, but it's showing on that.
Okay, that's all right, we have our experts in front of us. I've got 3 questions. First one I'd like to ask, and then we'll go to the audience of the panel, please. First one I'd ask is the demand signal. How do you sense the amount of housing that's required that comes from the government workforce, and how do you then relate that to the Section 8 housing and affordable housing? How clear is that demand signal from the military? You look like you're ready to answer that, Ashley. We can start.
Yes, I have some thoughts, but I also want to hear from some of the other experts, which is actually something that Blue Star Families looks at a lot, is PCS, right? We know that that's a high interest time for families. It really can disrupt everything in a family's life, but we also know that DOD has some level of control, a lot of control over that process, right? And so I think it is really important that DOD has the ability to work with local governments who are providing that housing to be able to say, we know that we're sending, for example, B2s to Ellsworth Air Force Base, right? And saying, so we know that we need more housing in South Dakota, right? In Rapid City, I should not have used that example, I don't know where it is. But I think that that's the perfect, right, example of saying, DOD knows when they're sending people to a particular place, and knows when they're increasing that rate and things like that. Another good example, and I apologize for my national perspective on this, but without a chapter here, and again, this is my pushing for one, but anyway, is Joint Base Lewis McChord, right, where the Army is continuously sending more and more folks out there, but they're also experiencing a housing crisis. And so I think that there is a role to play in that federal-local relationship. I'd love to hear from our local partners.
So, as a staff person at a city department, one of the things that we do is we look at data. Our department actually has a housing advisory board that advises our city council on housing issues. So we present a lot of information to them. So we look out at the market, we look at vacancy rates, we look to our developers to let us know what's happening as far as the demand for housing. We're actually in the middle, we do a housing study every 5 years or so. The Virginia Center for Housing Research at Virginia Tech is currently in the middle of doing one. We held 8 public meetings earlier this year and a slew of stakeholder meetings with service providers, developers, people who, realtors, lenders, so they were the stakeholder groups. We get all that information and then we data. But like I said, our council, especially during COVID, we never saw vacancy rates that low. It was, there was an eviction moratorium, so people weren't moving. And then we look at other things that are happening, like the interest rates, because the for sale market and the rental market are interlinked. And if people can't buy a house and there's limited availability of houses to buy, then they get stuck in these rental units. So we look at this sort of high level whole market, what's happening in our city right now. Our council people are pushing this issue too because they're hearing from constituents that they can't find a place to rent, or the rent has gone up tremendously. Rents in market rate units went up about 24% from 2019 to 2023, which is a huge increase. So they're hearing this as well. But in terms of demand, we look at it, there were 2 things happening. There was demographic issues. There are millennials who are starting to form households and they're hitting the market. And then we also have the pandemic. And so those two things together created housing supply constraints. And then the builders were having a difficult time building because of supply chain issues. So we had all these things happening in the market. Last year, Virginia Beach, we only saw 24 new apartment units built, very low. And that's left over from the pandemic. Fortunately, we have about 1,400 units under construction right now. So it's picking back up. And we have over 2,000 units sort of sitting out in the pipeline that have been approved by city council that haven't started construction yet. And some of those are affordable, meaning they serve people below a certain income level. But most of them are market rate. And we see affordability, that's another question that we asked as part of our housing study. Our council wanted to define what is affordable housing. And as Karen said, it's what's affordable to you, based on your income, based on what other expenses you have. If you don't have children, you don't have a childcare expense, maybe you can afford more. If you're an older person, we see a lot of elderly who are on a fixed income, and they may have healthcare, expenses. So it's different for everybody. But we're going through this housing study, and this time we're not just studying, we're also having Virginia Tech and Housing for Virginia work on strategies to address the issue. Because we don't just want a study.
Are you looking at veteran needs and service members, junior veteran service members, not just, the affordable housing population? How is the veteran and the military incorporated in your study?
So we're going to look at different subpopulations, including veterans and active duty military, because that was a question that came up. Is what you were saying, we don't know what that housing allowance is. Where does the military fit into our whole market? And then veterans may have a different need versus active duty military. So our consultant does a lot of number crunching using census data, where they can actually pull data on active duty versus veteran population in Virginia Beach, and what are their median incomes, how much are they paying for rent? So those are the questions that we're hoping some of this housing study will answer. But in the meantime, we're still trying to incentivize developers to produce the housing. And we have limited land, but I think our developers are, really doing the best that they can, given all the constraints that we have.
Well, I've never seen anyone work more with data than Rick, your organization. And again, I go back to the demand signal and the constraints that come from the pandemic, which was a definite aberration in the market that created a demand lag, really a supply lag, and demand is building right now.
Yeah, in terms of the demand signal, I don't know if there's anywhere, at least in any of our discussions with the military leaders, there's nowhere that says the military needs X units of affordable housing, right? I'll use the example of Langley Air Force Base, right? That they are getting a new training mission for the F-22 fighters. It's coming up from Florida after a hurricane hit the base down there. They did all the training. They're moving it up to Langley. Those people in aircraft are finally starting to show up, and that's going to bring about 500 to 600 personnel along with that mission. So the city of Hampton looked at it and has worked with Pocosin and York County, Newport News up there, and figured they can accommodate that mission. But one of the demand signals that we hear and that Langley leadership has brought to us, and they're trying to work through it, is they see that their personnel are taking a lot longer when they PCS in. It's taking them a lot longer to find a place to live. The military service members get about 14 days of temporary lodging expense. And that's supposed to be when you PCS in, that's enough for you to afford to be able to stay in either base lodging or in a hotel off base while you're securing, a place to live or you're waiting on your household goods. That is not adequate. They're finding it's taking people, 30, 60 plus days to find that housing. So they're going through as a process like anything else in DOD. It's very convoluted and time consuming to request an extension to that, get a waiver to that 14-day TLE limit. And I'm sorry?
She's about ready to jump out of her
So-
seat.
Oh,
Just to piggyback on what you said, I'm on the board of the Hampton Roads Black Caucus, but I'm also work for the Hampton Roads Workforce Council. So we went to Langley, and the commander, I think he's about to get relieved, but he's about to get relieved. He has addressed that issue, but what it is the challenge is the education. You've got members who have their whole career have lived on base, and now you're telling them that within 3 months, I think that's what he's giving them now, 3 months, that they have to relocate. So that's scary. That's scary because one, they have to get to work now because they didn't need a car before. So you have the transportation aspect that nobody's talking about, you're moving them, but Coast and all these other places, that's a transportation issue as well, and as well as housing. I mean, it's getting to the point where some airmen and Navy are getting, one person who's got good credit is buying a house, and he's subleasing the rooms. He's subleasing the rooms, and then you've got me who's retired who likes quiet, because now I have an understanding, but you'll see like 7, 8 people coming out of one home. But because we're having this conversation, but my neighbors don't know that. All they know is they see these young sailors, these young airmen are living in a 4-bedroom house where you see 8 people coming in and out.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna, you want to wrap up and let you have-
yeah, sure. On that, you're right. You're familiar. I think what he's talking about is the young single airmen that normally would live in the dorms. It's Air
Yes.
Force policy. They live in
Yeah.
the dorms for their first 3 years in the service. They're having right now, Langley's having to put them out in
Yes.
about 9 to 10 months as this new mission comes out because they got a shortage of dorm rooms on base. They're going to have to push them out in about 6 months or more.
Right.
We are working with the congressional delegation, Congresswoman Kiggin, Senator Kane, and others to try and get funding for a dorm in the budget. It's one of those things to get after. That's part of it versus the TLE thing, which is mostly affecting families as they're trying to find
Right.
houses. Because I mean, DOD made the decision years ago to get out of the housing business. They're not going to, they privatized all
Right.
the stateside housing complexes. And they're not going to build more houses. They are going to rely on the community to provide that housing. Only about 20 to maybe 30%, depending on the area, of the military personnel live in base housing. The rest of them are trying to find
I'm sure
affordable housing out in the
as
community.
experience, and I want to let Ron react though. How's the coordination on this command signal? You're saying that, the DOD got out of the business. There are these sorts of stories that are being told about demand overload, if you will. And how are the 9 different communities here coordinating of their requirements for junior enlisted or available for workforce housing with the communities? How's that going from Rocco's point of view or Ron from your point of view?
Yeah, I would say, again, there's no coordinated, I think, demand center that says we have X number of E4 to E6 that need
Right.
housing and the communities need to provide that. It's just assumed that if you can't get on base housing, they will find a place to live out in the community.
Right.
Now, there is discussion when
It's a market-driven.
it is a market-driven solution. Now, when a new mission like the F-22 training mission is coming, the Air Force is talking with their surrounding community saying, we're expecting this many more personnel to come in.
We may
to
not
plan
have
for
enough carriers, by the way.
Right. So again, anytime a new mission comes in, there's usually that discussion about how many people will be coming with it. But in terms of the day-to-day requirement, no, there's no hard say we need X number of houses.
Can I just jump in
Sure.
really fast? I just wanted to add a little bit of data to Rick's point about TLE. In our pulse check on housing, when we asked people how much money they spent in temporary lodging, the average amount was $2,032. And that almost half of active duty families who had moved in the past year spent 20 days in temporary lodging, right? And so this is an issue not just in terms of being able to find housing, right? But that when you aren't able to find housing, you have to stay in Airbnb for 3 months, and you have to pay for gas and whatever it is, right? That it's those knock-on effects that then can cause real financial harm to our military families and might even push them out of service, to Rick's earlier point about recruitment and retention. I will pass it back over, just wanted to add some color.
No, numbers are good, data's good. I'll let Ron answer it, then Bill, I see you in the back. I think that's, this housing demand requirement is something that is all day to day.
One of the things with the Hampton Roads Black Caucus, one of our pillars is community. Whenever we endorse someone, how are you going to improve the community? Whether it's affordable housing, whether it's safe communities, or whatever. Well, one of the ways we gauge the housing thing dealing with the military, we look at how many new commands are coming into the area. Because the new command coming to the area, that means new staffing, new personnel. Other indicators are relocation of military asset. If they relocate a carrier from Florida to here, that means all those 5,000 people got to find possibility, have to find housing here.
We've already got all of them from Florida. There's none left in Florida.
They don't live in Florida. Okay. Well, even if they come from the West Coast, they got to relocate. And also another indicator, because I like to check with family housing to find out what's, we check with family housing to see what's going on and is it a great need. The other thing is look at our businesses. If businesses are coming here and dropping in businesses saying, hey, I'm gonna have create how many new jobs, and some of them are coming from staffing, gonna be coming from out of the area. They got to find lodging. They got to find somewhere to stay. And if we can't afford, or we can't produce the housing that would accommodate them, then they're gonna go elsewhere with their businesses and with their corporation. So it is a need, and we have to look at all of it in its totality. The military, because one of the things when I was stationed in Charleston, when I was there, they asked the Charleston mayors to uplift the Cooper River Bridge because they was thinking about relocating a carrier unit there. They didn't do it. So next thing you know, we got bracket. It got put out of there. So I'm looking at if we can accommodate the military families, would they start relocating their assets somewhere else that can accommodate them so it doesn't put the stress on the service member. That means that's going to impact our economy. So we have to be proactive, not reactive.
I appreciate that. I was on the Brackett study. I'll get a question or a comment.
I do have a question. Well, I'm a reporter. And I'm a veteran. This is terrific. And I'm going to ask a question in a specific way, but I absolutely appreciate all of you and working with me. I guess I am ignorant and I'm surprised that the numbers don't really seem to be there on this issue given the importance of the military to the community. So I guess I would ask a two-part question. Number one, why aren't there better numbers on this, and what are we doing to actually specifically quantify what the need is and how that need relates or does not relate to the overall affordable housing need? And then secondarily, I go to Virginia Beach. I know one of the reasons we have lived, but Virginia Beach is a redevelopment city now, whether or not people want to acknowledge this. But frankly, one of the reasons it's a redevelopment city is because of the resources of BRAC. I mean, the threat of BRAC is one of the reasons why the city of Virginia Beach is not developing a heck of a lot of land around Oceana. So I guess I wonder, are there potential solutions there? But I mean, the important part of my question is, how do we actually really quantify the issue and not just have anecdotal stories or national numbers? Thank you.
I appreciate that. Ashley, I think you have an answer, and I'd ask Rick to maybe add a little bit more color on that.
So it's a great question, and
It's on.
yes, there we go. It's a great question, and I think what stands out to me, and one of the reasons that Blue Star Families was founded, is because people weren't gathering the data on those types of questions. Now, thus far, we've really been able to look at the national level because that's where we've been able to push out our survey on social media and things like that. But one of my big goals as a resident of Hampton Roads is to get enough data in the region to be able to answer those types of questions, right? To be able to say, when military families move to Hampton Roads, this is how much money they're paying out of pocket when they have to live in temporary housing. This is how many days they have to live in temporary housing. But Blue Star Families can't do that alone, it can't do it without funding, we're a 501c3. And so I think being able to partner with organizations like the folks who are in this room to get the word out, to say respond to the survey and reach out. And Blue Star Families wants to answer those questions, but I will say we are not the only organization that's gathering data. But I think it is a bigger question, a bigger proposal to put forward to folks like the federal government who often prefer to receive their own data and make sure that it is really solid and that they have a great sample, which Blue Star Families can't get because we do a snowball sample. We ask people's friends to get their family members and friends to do it, right? And so I think that part of the reason that we don't have that data is because we've been trying to do it, but there just hasn't necessarily been the will. But I think this room and the efforts of American Veterans Vote to start these conversations will really help us get there. So I will pass it to Rick to add some stuff.
I'm not sure what I can add to that, but I don't know what the right answer is because I don't know how you go about trying to quantify with the amount of military we have in this region, the different commands, different installations. Like I said, we could go to any one given installation and they might say, I've got this mission coming in that's got 300 people coming with it. But unless you go and somebody builds a housing development for 300 families, they're going to expect that they will spread out into the marketplace, right, and find housing. So unless there's dedicated housing, I don't know how you can necessarily track, how many writ large houses are needed specifically for the military, because it is a larger problem. I think that the military is a subset of the affordable workforce and available housing issue in the region as it is. And I know the region is looking at it. The Planning District Commission has a housing working group, working with municipalities to try and figure out what are some maybe best practices that the region writ large can do to try and encourage more affordable workforce housing.
Rick, who's that's doing that, that's putting that?
The Planning District Commission.
Sharon, you may have an insight on how do you help a civilian or non-military, what councils are there, what work groups are in place? How are is the region coordinating this demand?
I had actually jotted that down, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. Sharnita Bethea out there is, she does a lot of work regionally with homeownership and trying to help people become first-time homebuyers. But she has been talking about, they're retaining a consultant to also.
Just keep driving.
The lights. Is that working? Like I said, we just focus on Virginia Beach with our data, but I agree that housing is regional. People do not stop at Virginia Beach that work here in Virginia Beach. I also wanted to just talk a bit about what you were talking about with how long it takes people to find a place. When we had our stakeholder groups, we also, I forgot to mention, had employers as a stakeholder group, and they were saying the same thing, that when Geico or some of these larger companies tried to recruit people, they were having the same problem with the temporary hotels. They used to give 14 days and they had to keep extending it. So like you were saying, it's not just a military thing, it's a total market issue. And the military is a subset of that. But in terms of, coordinating and looking at how is the whole region going to respond, there's housing authorities in every city. There's all these different municipal governments. And we all see the need, but we're all kind of responding to it differently. The other thing I wanted to point out too is at a higher level, our municipality is working on a comprehensive plan. We have a timeline, I think, to have it completed and done by next June. So like Karen said, we're the housing department. The planning department handles zoning issues. So if that's an opportunity, again, for public input to get out there and talk about housing, because there's a housing chapter in the comprehensive plan that talks about
how we're going to plan for housing for all, the entire population, which includes veterans. So, and active duty military. So, I urge people to come out and to some of those planning input sessions too as well, to see, how you can provide feedback into our comprehensive plan as well.
Let me throw it out to the audience for a minute. Thanks for your question. We'll get back to you. Right here.
I'm with Soldiers Angels, and it's national. What I've noticed in the other states is that when a family moves and one of the members is deployed, the rest of the family is left to be on their own. Is there any kind of help that is available for them where they don't feel all by themselves?
There's a lot of deployments that go on. I had a master chief here somewhere. Give me a vet from the audience here.
She wanna answer.
Oh, there. How's
Two
that?
vets right here.
How are we taking care of deployed soldiers, spouses, and families?
So they have ombudsman, and with that extension of ombudsman, it's planned. They talk about it previously. They talk about, to be honest, a lot of family members don't stay in the area. They relocate again. They go stay with a family member, whether you're doing 6 months or 9 months or a year. A lot of them leave the area. That's a big part of it too, because one, like she said, they may not feel safe. They don't have support system, and childcare is sorely lacking in this area. It's very bad. It's a very bad situation. But speaking from a Navy's perspective, I don't know the other branches. We set ourselves up for success going into deployments. Deployments are known about way in advance, and the chief or the officer of the department, they sit down and talk to cells individually. We do financial planning. I don't know, I've been out 6 years, but I'm just saying, we do financial planning so that they can see on paper where they're at. Where they can see where they're at. So that's part of it. But an E5 who's single, who's only getting BH for $1,600, and apartments now. I have an adult child who's looking at apartments and looking at housing, and she was like, you have to make 3 times the rent.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Good insight.
Yeah.
Thoughts, sir?
Yeah, we're everything we're saying here is we're looking at a big, broad set. Why are we not looking at just the military? She's looking at everybody in the world, which I'm sorry, that's just too big a problem. Why are we not looking at simply the military? Because the military does know how many people are coming, what their ranks are, and we may think that they don't, but yes, they do. We should be able to get a pretty damn good idea of how many people are going to be coming here and what kind of quarters they're going to need. And then, I guess the other question is, where in the hell is the Department of Defense at this meeting?
Well, we're feeding back to elected representatives and others, but we have state officials here. I don't discount at all the fact that the data is likely known by the commands. It's an important characteristic of what's going on. But I think I heard here it doesn't come together in a coordinated fashion. It's piecemeal, so it's hard to get a regional demand signal.
And if I could jump in as well, I think the PCS process in general is one that Blue Star families and a lot of military and veteran service organizations, particularly military service organizations, are looking at.
Can you speak just a little louder?
Yes, that the PCS is a pain point, right, for military families, but for service members specifically. And that, thank you. And that, yes, I won't. And that across the board, there's a lack of communication and a lack of connected data that allows DoD to gather that data and then disseminate it out to the people who need to know it to be able to make those determinations, right? And so I think that while I agree with you and think that DoD does have the data and they should be able to share it, that there is a disconnect, and I do think it's important that we have elected officials here, because particularly federal officials who can tell DoD that they need to do a better job, or at least look into being able to disseminate that information better. But I think writ large, it's an issue that a lot of us think about and talk about, because we know that moving from one location to another is a pain point, not just for a service member, but for the spouse who might lose their job when that happens, for the kids who have to go to a new school, and have to deal with all of that. And so I think that, I take your point and I hear you, and I wish it were different, but this is where we are right now.
Yes.
So I have another question. So you have, since COVID, food has gone up, electricity has gone up, water has gone up, everything has gone up. Yet an E5 with just one child does not qualify for anything. And they should, because they too cannot afford stuff.
Well, I think I saw a lot of nodding. There wasn't sleep going on. Question?
Yes. I've been plugged into the veteran community for a while in this area, a couple others, and there's some things that I haven't heard yet discussed. One is the minimum wage here is $12 an hour.
$12.50.
So once they reach a federal poverty limit of 30,000 for a family of 4, they have ruled themselves out, and that's just a law. And they are like some of the best Mormon you can find in the world, but they don't want to get shot at anymore. You know, where they had a baby. You know, we also have the situation where some of them, they're broken from being in another country for so long. And when they come back, they would love to have chickens and hens. It sounds crazy, but I know almost over 100 people that moved out to Chesapeake and Norfolk just because of chicken. And I was like, are you serious? They're like, yeah. We want eggs. We don't know where eggs come from. We save our 18 eggs that we use a week for our family from $12 a dozen in the store. They also want the ability to, if they have solar, to be able to disconnect from doing in power and have a power bank. They're not able to do that now. They're not able to go ahead and have things like certain kinds of water collection for homesteading. A lot of them come back and they are looking at the reality of what they're coming back to, and they're saying, I don't really know if I want to be in a city that's not going to allow us to do this, because half this city is farm and rural, and the other half is, why are we paying for taxes for something we already pay taxes on when we bought it? And that is their legitimate frustration about all their versus whatever. And that is the honest to God thing that is the most frustrating. The Airbnb had a situation locally, and they didn't realize that that would impact the city this way when that was passed. And there are some things that I understand. I understand why that happened locally, because of certain safety concerns. But in the same note, we also had a front line that we didn't anticipate. And that unfortunately is what puts many of our displaced veterans into AWOL situations where they're forced out. And this is a very serious situation, because now they have the ability to no longer be honorably discharged, and they can't go to the shipyard. They try to go to California, they shut down their shipyards, Florida shipyards. And we need to start thinking about dry docks here that could possibly sustain it.
Let's get, yeah, you're right. And sticking to housing, that's the workforce that has built those ships, and they come in the numbers they do. Back to the military problem specifically. Is there a disconnect between the rather robust conversation I found in communities dealing with affordable housing and the proper allocation and the military housing necessary for the junior enlisted or the veterans housing needed that limit or help to treat the issues you just brought up? Are there two different conversations, and do they often talk by each other? Any thoughts on that? Are there two different conversations between affordable housing and available workforce housing for veterans and the military? Even though they're probably in the same economic strain, they're likely not necessarily facing the same circumstances.
From my gathering and talking with developers, they are talking workforce housing and affordable housing. They're looking at it at two different entities, and they're addressing them differently. Some developers trying to integrate both of them in there together. I know it's a major developer, he's trying to integrate them together. Some of them are keeping them separate. Workforce housing and affordable housing They're trying to keep it separate and deal with it in different ways. How they gonna do it, I don't know, but it is a problem. I think we need to look at it in its totality together. I think that's more realistic to look at it together, because if you're gonna have workforce housing, it has to be affordable for the people that are working. So it doesn't make sense to separate the two. And that's what I was telling a couple of developers, but they want to separate the two for whatever reason. And that's,
Sorry, you want to
The problem is, it, to some degree, is not the localities. It's DOD's problem. If they're gonna send people someplace, they have to at least have a reasonable expectation that the people are gonna be able to live somewhere. And that's a DOD problem. Now, you may say, well, we're getting pushback from the developers on it. Does the word BRAC ring a bell for the developers? So, I listen to this and I keep thinking, why is not someone building either an area or a damn big tall building? Because we can't build up here. Oh no, that would be wrong. But that's the only place we have to go. We have a green line. We can't go out past that. We need to be able to build upward. And why is not DOD have a hand in this to provide, if nothing else, at least some of the money to build quarters for people out in the community?
That's why the forum's happening right now. I mean, it was an issue that came up as various representatives listened to constituents. And the question is, where is that forum? How is that discussion being done? And how does it feed back to appropriate remedies that exist at federal, state, and local level? And we're getting into it, and it's good. Have a comment back here, please.
Just to let everybody know a couple of things. When you're talking to somebody that's a developer, represents developers as well, and you're talking about things like developers say, you know, do they build this stuff? Well, for instance, in single family homes, you're looking at basically the land cost. Now, this has to be all in. The land cost should be 25%, right around 25% or less of the house cost. So when you're going in and you're saying, okay, I've got to spend $80,000 for the lot, then I've got to pay property, I've got to pay tap fees. Let's say you're over $100,000 before you can even build. You've got to build a $400,000 house.
Wow.
Towards that, a couple of things that might help though. They're talking to municipalities that they really want, whether it's military or first responders, and you know, get them to waive proffers. They also profess that, hey, we want people here. Oh, but then heaven forbid if we waive proffers to let you develop it. And because that right there is going to be $12,000 or $15,000 per unit, just that you get to the system to let you build it. Another thing is allowing people to more density, maybe even, you know, and maybe a way to address that for the military is to say, okay, fine, I'm going to go in, I'm going to develop, whether it's an apartment community or single family homes, whatever condos, whatever the case may be, and we're going to designate this, I don't know if this is legal, but if you designate it strictly for military, for instance, or veterans, then waive the proffers, you know, that would help right there to allow more density. So if they're sitting here saying, well, we're only going to allow you to put, you know, 3 or 4 houses per acre, well, then come back and say, okay, well, this is what you're doing. We'll give you a variance on the density and let you put 10 houses on there.
Right behind you is a gentleman who has a question.
Yeah,
So what we're seeing here is that it's a civilian response. Like this room right now, the DOD not being present, it's a tragedy. Appreciate you being here. She's from Figure's office. I appreciate her being here to take us back to the congressman things. But here's the issue. So when I first came to the Navy in 1999, you had to be an E5 or above to get BAH. If you were single, and you only were able to get BAH below that if you were married. And so sometimes you would see sailors going out and getting married to each other just like that BAH. You didn't have co-located BAH, so it's just single family. But now, like you said, you're finding these junior sailors, these E2s, E3s that are all banding together, 7 at a time, and they're pooling their BAH so they can get nice houses, they can live together, subsidized rooms, whatever. Well, those 7 guys, you know, like 2008, 2009, they changed the policy on this, would normally have lived on the ship. Okay, that's Navy specific. They normally would have lived on the ship.
There's always a rat on the ship for every sale that's assigned.
That's right.
But what we're seeing now is you're seeing houses, and I'm not sure what the numbers of E3 and below that live out in town are right now, but you're seeing houses that would have normally gone to a single family, now being occupied by all these sailors. So you take the number of sailors that would normally be living on ships, and you put them out in town, and that's where you're using some of your housing. And you also do have housing on base. You do have there's a large complex over by Camp Allen, Camp Allen Gun Range, and you also have a large one that was built on base not so long ago, around Pier 5, Pier 6. But that only holds so many, and like you said, once they run out of room, where are we putting people? Well, sailors aren't staying on ship because they're now entitled to BH and at a younger age. So when you take a naval policy that's been in effect for years, decades, and you say, no, we're just going to give everybody BH, they can go out in town, here's your $1,500, go have fun. What you're doing is you're now adding all of this demand to the housing market that did not previously exist. Now, we're 13 years into this at this point from the reversal of that policy, to where you have sailors living out there. And we're only getting more and more E3 and below. Okay.
So just to say on that, so the reason for that is more the Navy, I don't speak about the Navy, I'm sorry. The Navy, Pacific, but military, but the Navy is what I know, is that I get what you're saying, that they're pushing that on them. But if you looked in the paper about 6-7 months ago, the George Washington had 3 suicides in 1 week. You cannot work and live and be productive mentally and physically. So that the need is there. And the need is definitely there, that a sailor or an officer, whoever, whatever branch of service you serve, the DOD or governments realize you can't live and work in the same place.
How more difficult does it make this inadequate childcare that you mentioned?
Go, you finished.
So just my second point, though.
Yeah.
Rick said that the DOD is no longer in the housing industry. Okay, we don't have any. Are there any representatives here from Lincoln Housing or Liberty Housing? Nowadays, no. And this is the thing you're seeing. So Navy housing in itself. Nobody wants to go to Navy housing anymore because there's a stigma behind all the mold issues that happened a couple years back.
Yeah.
I had to fight for sailors on that. You also have. They're not building any more barracks. Okay, when you think of sailors, you think of soldiers, you think of airmen, you think of barracks. Young guys living in the barracks. It's like a dorm room, whatever it is, right? They're not building any more of those. So again, you have this influx of people. She's right. You shouldn't have to live on the ship that you work on, and it fills around. But at the same time, you have to provide them an alternative other than just saying, hey, here's civilians, we have a place for everybody. And I think that's one of those knee-jerk reactions that we're looking at now. Again, it's been 13 years, and we're still in this room talking.
It's pretty clear that the room would agree that the market-based solution isn't working quite well. It's not working in the civilians.
But there's also a change in culture. I spent 3 years in Baghdad, and I can remember at 2 o'clock in the morning listening to some Army E2 in there on the phone talking to his wife, trying to solve her problem. In the old days, it was you deployed, and that was it. And you didn't have that link back. So it's putting different pressures on families too.
Yep.
I mean, it's not just that, but to have at least secure housing. And if that means that the DOD is gonna have to get involved in the housing world again, too damn bad.
You see how things worked pretty well prior to the DOD getting out of the housing industry. The DOD providing for its own has been a staple of being in the military for years.
Yeah.
We're seeing, and this is a bigger issue, you're seeing a continuous commercialization and the military selling things off to the civilian sector that don't need to be given to the civilian sector, and we're in this room because of that.
So I just wanted to jump in briefly on military privatization housing initiative, which is what you're referring to, which passed, I think, in the 1995, 1996 NDAA. Anyway, and I think you're totally right. I think one of the biggest issues with that particular situation was that DOD entered into 50-year contracts that couldn't be changed without the approval of the housing companies. And so if DOD comes with, say, the Tenant Bill of Rights, like they did, let me rephrase, if Congress requires that DOD implements the Tenant Bill of Rights, like they did 4 years ago, DOD cannot do that unilaterally, and so there are these bigger issues that come with housing, right? Because if you say we have this Tenant Bill of Rights that everyone has a right to, but the companies don't implement them, that is a bigger issue. I would be happy to talk more about it. I feel very strongly about it. I did also want to speak briefly. I know childcare came up a little bit before, and I just wanted to touch on the issue of childcare as it relates to housing. And look more broadly also at the financial readiness of military families, sort of to your point about when someone deploys and there's still these issues that are going on at home, right? So that can run the gamut from childcare, which then has knock-on effects if a spouse can't work because they don't have childcare. Then there are these other compounding problems that just get stacked up and stacked up and stacked up. And I think that to the conversation today, that there is a role for each part of the government and the community to play. And so I think that part of it has to be the federal government coming in, gathering the data, and then making good decisions. And maybe pulling back from some of those privatization initiatives and things like that. I think it's also important that the state is involved because we know that often the state is really integral when it comes to solving constituents' issues, which is why it's so important to have representatives from currently serving state officials, but also folks who are running for state office in the room. And then of course, I think it's out of battery. And then also, of course, local officials, right? Who are the ones who are interacting every day with whether it's base commanders or excuse me, I completely lost my train of thought, or service members and their families, et cetera. So I think that each group has an important role to play, and that we can't dismiss any particular aspect of government or any particular part of this really thorny problem. There's one other thing I wanted to say, which was earlier in the front row. I can't remember who said it, but someone was talking about food being more expensive and food insecurity. Yes, thank you. I love your lipstick, by the way. Anyway, food is more expensive, and food insecurity is a key issue that our military families are facing today that is deeply impacted by whether or not they can afford their housing. And so, I don't want to take up any more time. I know you have more questions.
Well, I just have a question. You wanted to follow up?
Yeah, I want to follow up. I'm gonna tell you, I'm probably gonna write a column on this. The problem I see here in this conversation, you guys are all wonderful, especially you run for office, good for you. Nothing happens without numbers.
Right.
So we don't want people to have talking points for their campaigns. If we want policy to get done, we need numbers. I don't think the federal government's the way to get it, with all due respect to the federal government. I enjoyed my time in the Navy. But there are ways to get these numbers, and it seems so incredibly clear to me. I would be happy to talk to any of you. But one of them is the state of the region. I mean, ODU has a team of researchers who answer these questions. If they can talk to a bum like me, they can talk to awesome people like you, I assure you. And it really does seem like we can get all this information from the basis. We can get demand, we can reach out to the city, we can be part of the comprehensive plan of Virginia Beach. We can understand that the Green Line's wonderful, but the intersolate traffic area between Oceana and Texas actually is south of the Green Line, and maybe there's some wiggle room on that land. We'll talk about that later. So, I mean, it really does seem that these numbers are doable, and I guess I don't understand why I'm not hearing any of the leaders in this room saying we should get together and get these numbers because we know that there will be policy.
You're hitting the bottom line there. What are some feasible, reasonable alternatives? Like get together, like put the numbers together, like create a work group that can maybe work through with the city officials and deal with this particular militarily specific veteran and workforce requirements, as well as they're working on affordable issues. That's kind of what's bubbling up as I hear. Let's see, other questions back here? Bill, do you have anything to offer back there as you're listening to housing issues and knowing you work in this area? I apologize for microphones, but I'm not able to get it to you.
Well, I'm almost reluctant to say anything.
We have a state official with us who pays full attention to this and appreciate your thoughts.
Well, of course, I participated in Councilman Chris Taylor's event, was a couple weeks ago. And it was having to do with housing and of course primarily city council specific, but didn't talk a great deal about the military in that, although it was tangential because you can't ignore it in this area. I'd just like to say that the governor is very much aware of this, and he has been in conversation. In fact, I mentioned at that conference that every year he has a housing conference, and it generally attracts about 1,400-1,500 people at a max, between 1,000 and 1,400 people. It's going to be here in Hampton, at the Hampton Convention Center in November, October-November conference. And that's where all of your housing officials from around the state, all the jurisdictions, all of your planning officials, your planning district commissions, everyone shows up there. We discuss in general the housing issues. And in most cases, the governor will provide his vision and what he's looking at doing to address some of this. We talked about affordable housing and workforce housing. Well, you have to talk about affordable workforce housing, right? That's really what we're talking about, because.
And available.
And absolutely. And so when you're talking about affordable housing, people think about low, moderate income people. But actually, affordable housing can be for someone right out of college, right? Who is a college graduate looking for a place to live. So it's sort of merging now. If you go to different areas, or different areas in this in Hampton Roads, and you ask people what they think about affordable housing, they'll tell you something entirely different, depending upon where they are. It means different things to them. So you have to come up with a common definition that we can all understand and appreciate, to make sure that we know its difference. There are differences. Now, planning district commissions across the state are looking at this, and I think it's appropriate, very important for them to be heavily engaged, because they represent all the jurisdictions. And let me tell you, this is not a Virginia Beach problem, housing for military. It is a Hampton Roads regional problem. So Hampton Roads has to embrace it as a region, not just individual cities. Those sailors and soldiers and airmen coming to these bases live all over the area, everywhere. And you have to have transportation if you build housing for them also, because a house doesn't help you if you don't have transportation to get to your base, or to your ship or whatever. So all of this, the governor's aware of it. We have many programs at my agency, the Department of Housing and Community Development, and we work primarily closely with the jurisdictions. So Virginia Beach is an entitlement city. That means they get their development, their funding directly from the federal government. We help them and work with them, but it's not like some of the other jurisdictions, maybe say Suffolk. It's not. We work with them closely. It could be, I just don't know off the top of my head. Isle of Wight, because they're more rural, they may not have the infrastructure to address the housing issues. But if you look around Virginia Beach, you're gonna see a lot of housing.
Luxury.
You see a lot of it. It's just inadequate. It's not enough.
Bill, I think I'm hearing that the military and veteran housing issue is complicated, it's off base, perhaps not well documented or data available to it. Is that going to be part of that Hampton Roads, or you mentioned the conference coming in?
Yeah, we talk in general, but sitting here and listening to this and being retired Navy myself, I will go back and have a talk with our director and see if there's, perhaps we have breakout sessions where we discuss, difficult issues in detail. This is probably one where we ought to. But we have to have the military involved. We cannot do that at the state level. We have to have the military involved in that. So I will take that back.
Yeah, with DOD in the room, just to echo what I think I heard. Sir?
Yeah, that was a very good point. But what we really need is someone who will raise their hand and say, I will ask the question of every command in Hampton Roads. And I would bet you that the governor would say, we'll quietly whisper in DOD's ear, answer this question. So there would be pressure from the state to answer the question. We're not going to get we can't do that now, it's too hard. But somebody has to step up and say, me, I'll ask the question.
And to that though, when you say ask the question, what's the question? How many houses do you need, or is it how many personnel?
People, how many people, how many are on the base, how many are off the base?
Right, and Navy Region Mid-Atlantic could probably give a breakdown of the Navy personnel in the region by grade, married or not. But those people are living somewhere right now.
You would think
so the issue, so they're living somewhere. Mm-hmm. Now the issue is they're paying on average $360 out of pocket.
Right.
So in terms of the Navy, they're not going to be able to say, I need houses for 1,000 people, because all of their personnel are living somewhere right now. It's just the problem is they aren't finding a place, they're having to pay out of pocket, and so they're having to cut back in other places and sacrifice in other areas.
They might have to ask the question within their command.
But they may not be able to answer right now,
right.
But they know who's transferring him.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
you know who's
But yeah,
coming.
usually it's somebody's leaving, somebody's coming in, so yeah, right.
They
So
know
they can give a
that.
breakdown.
One more opportunity to the audience and final thoughts from the panel, and then we can mix and ask all each other questions. And, Rihanna?
I just wanted to know, he mentions about a conference where they're just going to be talking. When is something going to be done?
Well, I will tell you that that conference, people share what they are doing, and they share what the shortfalls are, and they share thoughts on how to address those. That's what the conference is all about, because there's a great deal going across the state, going on in terms of housing across the state, and some of it is siloed, we don't know. So that conference helps us to all have a better perspective, but there are ongoing initiatives to address housing. The governor has said, you hear him say, we want to bring more business to Virginia. One of his biggest, stumbling blocks is housing, because before companies will consider coming here, they're going to ask the question, where can my employees live?
Yeah.
And that's the problem. So he has to address that up front to assure them that there's going to be a place adequate housing for their personnel before they start digging holes and building buildings. So that's what we discussed at that conference, and it is very successful. It really is. And
Is there a report that comes out or anything that's publicly available that comes out of that?
Yes, there's a report. And in fact, we have a housing report that we do also. And the governor had listening sessions in 8 jurisdictions around the state. I participated in them last year this time. When we went, we asked the areas, what are your problems in housing? What do you need help for? What are the issues? Pretty much we're all basically the same. And so we were able to capture that, and the governor has since worked with the Department of Housing and Community Development, Virginia Housing, all the other ancillary organizations that he has working right now to come together and come up with plans on how to address some of these issues. Can't address them all at one time, but the biggest ones that have the most impact.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Sharon, did you have some final thoughts?
I found this very enlightening. Like I said, we went into our housing study this year and somebody had brought up the military aspect of our market. And, other than, like I said, I used to work for a nonprofit and we serve homeless and disabled veterans. So I was very knowledgeable about that smaller segment of the population that needed housing. But like you were saying, that's a different type of housing and a whole different type of need than what you were talking about. So I found this really enlightening to hear about the whole military, the active duty military, as well as veterans who are extremely low income.
We have a comment from the back, maybe to add.
Yes, sir. Roger earlier about generations. And I come from a 32-year career Marine, brothers myself, 5 was all Marine Corps. And it was right after World War II, was right after the Great Depression. And we all were tough people back then. And that is on a major decline in this country. Everybody said, give me this, give me that from government. Well, you go out and find your own job. You go out when it says free market competition is inadequate. Who said that? This is a nation built on capitalism and free enterprise. And right now it's based on systems. That I want government to do this, I want government to do that. It's time that you do it yourself. I was given $91 when I hit Paris Island. And I got a rifle and a pack. And we went to fill, I got C rations, K rations. And I was doing fine. I slept on a mattress, maybe 2 inches thin. Probably like 2 million people slept on the floor of me. I didn't complain because I was serving my country. Instead of my country serving me. And I hear all these comments, maybe there's not enough more seasoned people in here. I'll be 83 in November. I'm not going to complain about anything. And that's all I hear.
But there was a chain of command that took care of the Marines.
Pardon me?
There was a chain of command that took care of the Marines.
Yeah.
And outside the gate was, they helped them all post quarters. No, yes.
You had a barracks to live in.
They're no longer barracks.
The Marine Corps no longer has barracks?
No.
Don't have enough.
They have mold in them. They have mold in them, that's part of it.
housing design is less than it was, it's less optimal. So all we're saying is that wasn't a solution that's now available as it once was more broadly.
Molding, I live in a Quonset hut in the gym. Come on.
Listen, I can't argue with that. I can't argue with that.
Is it worth our while, though, to focus on military rather than everybody cats and dogs?
Sir, I would offer that simply that there's a lot of discussion that goes on in that area. What it revealed to me is there's not a lot equal discussion going on about military as it relates to similar conditions, but possible different solutions. And that's the only point. Thank you, Sharon, for, bringing up the fact that the civilian community has studies and councils and coordination. Ashley, and you're looking deep into the military side, right?
Yeah, and I think, the first thing that I wrote down, I'm just gonna yell. The first thing that I wrote down to talk about as part of my closing remarks was cultural competency, which comes up a lot at Blue Star Families. Our mission is to bring together civilian and military and veteran communities. And you can't do that if the civilian community doesn't understand the military and veteran communities. And so I think that it is really key to have folks like Sharon listening to these conversations, for the governor to have this conference where you have a dedicated time for military issues, because we know that it is a subset of the community. It is a subset of our state, that it is important to look at these issues individually and with a focused lens. And so I think it's important, and it's something that we talk about across the board. I know mental health came up earlier. We need mental health professionals who are culturally competent. But specifically when it comes to housing and having these conversations and taking action, that it's important that there is that understanding across the fence line when lots of military folks are now living in civilian communities, right? I think the second thing that I wanted to say was on the point of action, right? Blue Star Families, I can't remember what we call it, but our theory of change, that's what it's called. Our theory of change is listen, share, partner, act. And so listening is our data gathering. So again, thank you to those who are going to take our military family lifestyle survey, but also encourage all of you to share it with your communities. I think it's so important that we get as many voices as possible. Then we share that data like I did earlier today. And then we partner with organizations like the folks who are up here and coming to panels like this. But that fourth piece is so important, right? To act. And so that is part of my role as a member of our advocacy team, to go to Congress to say, we need to get this into this annual bill that we know is going to pass and that can actually make change for our service members and for our veterans. And then also to do that at the local level. We had the opportunity to present to the lieutenant governor last year, and we know that there is action being done at the state level, right? So, and then the last thing I will say, I know I mentioned it already, our military family lifestyle survey is going to be published next March. And I would really, this is both a personal and a professional plea, because I am I'm a lifelong resident of Hampton Roads and understand the value and importance of this area, not just sort of internally, but as a military hub, and how important the military is to this community. And so being able to go to our leadership team and show that there is a wellspring, right, of care about the military community, and specifically about these areas where we're focusing on financial readiness, on housing, on that type of thing. And so again, I have cards with me and would love to speak with any of you, answer any further questions you might have, or tell you more about the work that we're doing. But last thing, and then I promise I will pass it on, is just a big thank you to everyone, to our hosts for inviting us, and to each of you for listening and being willing to have this conversation.
Thank you. All right, Rick?
Yeah, I think I started off with the earlier comments this evening with there's no easy button for affordable workforce housing, whether it's the military or non-military folks. And this has been a fantastic discussion, but I think that's still, there is no easy button, right? There's it goes back. This issue goes back a long way. Some of it, historically, there's been a change within DOD. Like you said, sir, we used to provide housing for all of our service members, whether it was on base in barracks or on base housing. But that was also because our bases used to be out in the middle of nowhere, and there was no communities really around them. So they had to kind of be self-contained little cities on their own. Now, as the country has grown and we're surrounded by these communities, The military's philosophy is we're going to rely and try and get out of things that aren't our core competency, and we're going to rely on the surrounding communities to provide, some of those types of services. And so that's why I get back to the military affordable housing piece. I really do think it's part of a larger community affordable and available workforce housing piece that we've been talking about here. Because as we were just discussing, it's an economic development issue too for the region, because not only is DoD going to maybe reconsider putting additional missions here in the region if we can't, if they can't house their service members, but any large company that's thinking of setting up shop here is going to be looking at that as well. So that's why I think it is going to require multi-pronged approaches and cooperation at all the local, state, and federal levels to try and get after this issue.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.
I'd like to thank everyone for participating. But one of the things I'll say is what it says in the Bible, man perished because of lack of knowledge. And because we are not communicating, all three branches, the local, the state, and the feds need to all work together and communicate. We know the problem. All three levels of government knows the problem. But we need to work together and communicate on the solution. We need to become solutionists because we know the problem. We don't have to focus no more on the problem. We need to focus on the solution to the problem. We need to become solutionists instead of just having talking sessions about the problem. We know the problem. We need to go to solutions now. What solutions? Start having think tanks on the solution and communicate those solutions, and all three communicate together. Because when all people are communicating together, we can solve all kinds of problems. We live in the greatest nation in the world. If we could put a man we could put a man on the moon, a rover on Mars. This housing crisis or thing is easy to fix if we just focus on the solution. That's what they did when they wanted to put a rover on Mars. They focused on the solution. How do we do it? The problem was how we get it there. They focused on the solution and how to fix that problem. So we need to focus on the solution. Leave the problem. We know what the problem is. Let's focus on the solution and become solutionists. That's my take. Thank you for participating. I thank you for allowing us to help host.
Well, let's get the panel. It's clear we touched on a hotspot, and it's very helpful to have the expertise presented here, the questions and comments and concerns from the audience. Nothing is no easy button, nothing is easy, but there are solutions. Maybe getting the conversation underway and maybe seeing the difference between the communities as they look at military housing, other type of housing, and the changes that have gone on culturally within the military that have created more demand than we might have expected, but now we have to answer it. And that answer is part of the solution, as Ron pointed out. Thank you for being here. We're going to hang around for a little while. Happy to talk to you, answer other questions. The panel, you're free to go or stay.
Thank you for sponsoring us. Thank you.